Hello, this is a recording associated with Political Science 415 and 515, Public Policy. And we're continuing our discussion of public policy concepts using the game, the political process. So the last video that we did looked at the presidential cabinet and talked about considerations one would make when one was putting together their cabinet. Now I want to talk about some other considerations when it comes to uh, forming relationships with outside organizations. So the character that we were working with was a president named Pamela Bibbs, who was a Republican, I believe a pretty conservative Republican. So then, if we're looking at sort of building relationships and making contacts, the question would be what types of organizations would it make sense to sort of focus on? So the logical place to start would be considering, what is your base of support and what types of organizations would appeal to your base of support. So if we go down the list, Pamela Bibbs is a conservative Republican. So some of these education organizations, some education organizations are conservative and some are liberal. So you kind of have to um, kind of look at them individually. So if you look at the profile, National Education Union, the ideology is liberal. Um, so that might not be your highest priority. If you look at the trust, the game gives you a trust level, so it shows the trust at like 51%, which obviously isn't particularly high. So uh, back. Uh, Labor and Republican candidates, conservative Republicans, tend not to be allied very much, um, given that Republicans tend to favor more right to work kinds of situations where um, people don't have to join labor unions to practice a particular trade. And um, so even though Republican candidates do campaign at labor events, President Trump, or former President Trump, I should say, recently campaigned at a labor event, um, but it's not particularly common. Now, the Organization for Gun Rights, gun rights organizations do tend to be conservative uh, kinds of mainstays that conservative politicians will reach out to. Um, so interestingly, right now there's only a 42% trust level. Um, so even if, in terms of partisan identity and general ideology, there may still, be some trust issues. So in the game, one thing you can do is attend an event of the organization uh, to try to build up some goodwill and build up some support within that organization. So you can see by doing that, you raise the trust level. It went from 42 or 41 or 42% to 43%. So not a huge increase, obviously. Um, and you can see the kinds of policies that they're interested in, opposing universal background checks, opposing gun control measures, et cetera. So one thing you could do, if you go back, we looked at the policy profile of Bibb's earlier. And one thing you could do in the game is go back, and if you wanted to build up even more trust with the organization, you could adjust those policy uh, positions that you have in regard to gun control to match up with the organization. So medical organizations and nursing organizations, um, you know, medical is kind of interesting because a lot of doctors can tend to be more conservative or more Republican because they tend to make more money and therefore tend to favor lower taxes. Um, so the National Medical Association might reach out. Um, Also, uh, some doctors are concerned about too much government intervention in the healthcare sector. So that also makes them more favorable toward Republican politicians who also tend to be skeptical of more government involvement in the medical sector. So if you look at the introduction, it says, I see that your views and our views are contrary to one another. Perhaps you'd like to attend one of our events, hear our perspectives. So yeah, at this point, the trust is at 27%. You see the ideology is moderate. Um, so again, you could choose to attend an event if you wanted to try to appeal to that organization. Um, and that is one other consideration with things like this as well is, there's appealing to your base and appealing to those audiences that are already likely to favor you to begin with, and then there's reaching out to organizations that maybe have constituencies that wouldn't tend to be supportive of you, but maybe you're trying to show that you're making outreach to certain communities that your party typically doesn't have the confidence of. Um, so, for example, a women's rights organization. So Republicans are associated with pro-life policies, for example, which often puts them at odds with women's rights organizations. So if you were going to try to do some kind of outreach, you could do an introduction. So this is a liberal organization, uh, and you can attend an event to learn their policy interests. Interestingly, this you have a 67% trust level with this organization, which, given that it's a Republican, is kind of interesting. So again, you can attend an event, and then the trust level goes up. But you can see their policy interests, and if you want to make any adjustments to try to improve that relationship, although a 68% trust level is pretty high, so you probably wouldn't need to improve things that much. And then the last one here is an environmental association, which again, if we're looking at Republican politicians or conservative politicians, they're typically associated with being more skeptical toward policies addressing climate change and perhaps even skeptical to the idea of man-made climate change in general. So we can do an introduction. It says our views are contrary, invites you to attend an event. So the trust level is very low here, 17%. And again, it's a liberal organization, so you can go attend one of their events, and then trust goes up a little bit you learn their policy positions. So, this would be a consideration as you're, um, in the last video, we selected the cabinet, and in selecting the cabinet, one of the considerations with the cabinet is we need to hire people who are best going to be able to implement our policy agenda. And in working to implement a policy agenda, we also need to build relationships with organizations outside of the government as well. We need to build a base of support that we can draw from when we need to try to convince members of Congress to support maybe policies that they're less inclined to support. And so these types of organizations can put pressure on politicians to support our policy agenda if we've taken the time to get to know them and appeal to their interests. So another tab in this area is political action committees. So if we're a Republican politician, it makes sense to reach out to the National Republican Political Action Committee. So political action committees support candidates. So the Republican political action committees support Republican candidates. Democratic political action committees obviously support Democrats. They collect money. They collect campaign contributions that they can then use to support particular candidates, or they can support issue ads. But the political action committees and the campaigns are supposed to operate independently. So they're not supposed to be coordinating with each other on campaign commercials, on messaging, and things like that. So these political action committees can collect funds and use funds to advance policy positions or advance campaigns, or candidates, I should say, as they see fit. But they should be operating as independent kinds of entities. So, and we see, interestingly, that right now with the National Republican Political Action Committee, we only have a 48% trust level. So if we're campaigning and we want to get the support of that PAC, we're going to need to do some work to build up a better relationship to try to get more of that support if we're anticipating that we're going to need it. And then they have a political action committee for the congressional Republicans. And then they have political action committees for different sort of specialized groups or specialized trades. So there's a conservative construction political action committee, conservative agriculture. So that might be one that we want to reach out to build up support, if we're looking for support in states that have a high concentration of agriculture. We're going to want to reach out to the political action committee that raises money for conservative candidates in those more rural kinds of states. The trust level, again, is not particularly high, 48%. So if we're counting on support from a group like this, we're going to want to do some work in that regard. Defense Political Action Committee. Republican candidates are typically associated with being in favor of a strong military and more spending on the military traditionally than Democrats. So make an introduction. And again, you know, the trust level seems to be pretty standard across the political action committees. So that indicates that, you know, we have some work to do. One of the things you can do within the context of the game is you can actually do fundraising, and you can fundraise for the party, and you can fundraise for yourself. So if you're trying to gain more trust within the context of the Republican Party, you know, if you do more fundraising for the party, that's probably going to earn you more trust in the party. So that's a consideration. So you have to balance fundraising for yourself and fundraising for other people as well. And of course, just as was the case with the sort of special interest organizations, you can take policy positions or adjust policy positions to put yourself in more alignment with different political action committees. And then there's also ideological groups that aren't associated with necessarily particular parties, but they represent particular interests. So you've got clean energy, which would tend to be more associated with the Democratic Party, whereas coal mining and the oil production PACs would tend to be more associated with Republicans, since, you know, Republicans tend to be more supportive of traditional energy sources, whereas Democrats tend to be more supportive of clean energy or alternative energy. So the environmental PAC would probably lean more liberal. So we can take a look. Oil production PAC. So you see their trust level is 63%. So that's a pretty high level of trust. So you could probably expect to get some support from that political action committee if you continue to support positions in line with theirs. Whereas if you look at the environmental PAC, you're at 34%. So sort of a mirror image. So obviously, the president here is perceived as being favorable toward traditional energy and less favorable toward alternative energy sources, as well as environmental regulations in general. And then you can look, you know, there's pro-choice, pro-life, gay rights, women's rights, again, you know, education, medical. So in terms of, you know, we sort of, in the first set of videos, we talked about kind of the policy profile of the president and sort of establishing a policy platform. And then once the president gets into office, he or she needs to think about, how am I going to actually be able to advance this policy platform? And one step is to create a cabinet that is going to carry out your policy agenda. And as we talked about, that doesn't necessarily mean that every member of the cabinet is in complete lockstep with with the president's positions on every issue, but they are going to advance the president's agenda. So you need that element, but you also need support from outside organizations, you know, special interest groups, that, you know, can organize the members of the public. You know, they have membership that they can reach out to and get their membership to email and write letters and call members of Congress to support particular positions. And then you also need to build up relationships with political action committees, which again can do ads in support of particular policy issues, but also can raise money in support of particular candidates as well, which can give the president political capital if they need that to advance their agenda. So I think that's all as far as this is concerned. But one thing to think about is how do you balance sort of appealing to your base and trying to appeal outside of your base? So most politicians, whether they're conservative or liberal, want to appeal to independent voters. And sometimes, depending on the states that you're targeting, swing states or so-called purple states that you're targeting, you might want to even be seen as, if you're a conservative politician, maybe you want to be perceived as more friendly to the environment. So one question I would ask if you're giving policy advice to the president is, how much attention do you give to shoring up the base versus how much attention do you give to independence versus, how much attention do you give to trying to convert people that are maybe in the other political party and get them to come over and support you or vote for you? So keep that in mind and make comments in the YouTube video, or I'll include links to social media sites as well. So you can provide comments there as well. But in the meantime, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.